Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder and we're having a look at the Type 65. The Type 65 you're able to get if you complete or buy 13 of the Tanker's Marks of Distinction. Basically this is the 13th that we're on right now, so there is only 2 left, so unless you're willing to buy the Marks of Distinction, or if you're very close, then unfortunately you won't be able to get this tank or SPAA. So what is the Type 65? The Type 65, in all honesty, is a T-34 with a very odd turret on it, which has 2 guns from the ZSU-37. If you've never used the ZSU-37, it used to be an absolute arse back in the day, because with its 37mm, it had full HVAP belts, just like how the Whirlwind used to. Well, the Type 65 is literally no different. I believe, and I might be wrong in this regard, but when I unlocked this, which was about 12 hours ago, from this point, it actually did have a full HVAP belt. But then, either in a micro patch, it was changed to resemble the belt which the ZSU-37 has. So the belt that I'm talking about is the BR167P, which is HVAP T, Heavy T, Heavy T. It can penetrate up to 102mm, which is kinda crazy for a vehicle which has a battle rating of 5.3 and also is able to rapid fire 10 shells into your face. So, the fact that it had a full HVAP belt, or at least it used to, according to my knowledge, generally I'm not going to talk about it because, well, it's not what it is in the game. But if you do want some recommendations on what belts to use, the belt that you have to use is the BR167P. So the one I just described with the HVAP Heavy. The other belts, such as Default, they are basically just worse versions of the BR167P. If you really want to go after aircraft and nothing else, which is quite an interesting task to do if you're in Russian AA since it's not as good as the others, then you go for the U0 or UO167 belt, which is full heavy. But generally, with 2 heavy shells and a HVAP in your belt, it means that you are going to do a lot of damage anyway to planes, and you also have the extra benefit of doing a lot of damage to many tanks around the 5.3 BR. The fact it sits at 5.3 is also a wonderful thing, because it means that you are able to round out a really good lineup for the Russians. At 5.3, the Russians before had the T-34-85 D5T and the IS-1, and generally you would have to round out those 2 tanks with something like an Su-85M or a ZSU-37. Well, now instead of just having the Su-85M, which is a pretty good tank destroyer, not as good as the Su-85 in my opinion, but it's still pretty good, you can now have the Type 65 in it. So if you don't do so well in your medium tanks or heavy tanks, depending on what you decide to go out in first, you have that option of relying on something which won't just be good at killing aircraft if you're accurate, because remember it is quite slow firing, but also because it's good against tanks, or at least has the ability to attack tanks, at least tanks that you will face. So it just rounds out the whole lineup, and not even just looking at the tanks, you also have some wonderful vehicles that you can take in the air. Generally I take 5 vehicles going into a battle. So the T-34-85 D5T, IS-1, Type 65, and then the Su-6 M71F, which can be replaced with the IL-10 if you feel like it, and then the LA-7 B-20 if you want some fighter support. If you don't feel like any fighter support, well, you got the Air 2s, or you could just put another IL-10 in, like I talked about before. You can even put in the Yak-9P or the I-185 M71. They all work pretty much the same, apart from the I-185, but generally you don't get up to the speeds where it struggles in ground forces. So it really does help out this lineup, which I really enjoy, and the reason why I enjoy it is because it's not 5.7. The T-34-85 is one of my favourite vehicles in game, and it also has a good lineup around it. The IS-2 is something you can use the PT-76 to throw in, but once again it didn't have that crowning AA. Now, you do. You have the Type 65 at 5.3. But the issue is, with that lineup, is because it sits at 5.7, and also Tier 4, remember, The fact is, you get up-tiered into a lot of 6-7 matches. So with using a 5-3 lineup, what happens is you can't get into those 6-7 matches. The maximum you can get into is 6-3. So you miss all of those crazy premium tanks and the cesspit, which is 6-7 when it comes to the premiums, when it comes to also the vehicles they've put in to try and counter the premiums. It also means that you can get downtied into 4-3 battles, but generally that doesn't happen. You're normally fighting around 5-3 or 4-7 because, well, that's very popular right now. Basically down to the Americans with the Jumbo and the 76 M4A1 and even the Hellcat at 5-3. So it just overall just really rounds out one of my favorite lineups in the game. Now let's talk about how to kill this thing, because I think it's very important for people to know how to kill it, because, well, it's going to be running around quite a lot. There's going to be a lot of these going about if we look at the statistics at how many people will have got it. First of all, it has an incredibly quick turret rotation speed, so you can't rely on it being something like a ZSU-37, which if you get around the flank of it, then maybe it's not going to turn in time. It is going to. It has 50.5 degrees per second of turret rotation speed. The guys in the turret must vomit quite a lot, to be quite honest. It is incredibly quick when you see it in game, and it also has very quick elevation. So we can track not just tanks but planes very well, which is pretty good from its perspective. From your perspective as the tanker, maybe not so good. So yeah, that's something you have to first of all take into account. Let's also talk about its armor. So its armor is very similar to what you'll find on a T-34-85D5T. As you know, the T-34-85D5T, generally it is a good idea to stay away from that machine gun port because it tends to be kind of bouncy, and also away from the driver's hatch, because unlike some other vehicles in the game, the driver's hatch has more armor than the rest of the upper glacis. So if you do have a shot and you decide to take it on the, well, not chassis, but upper glacis or the hull of the vehicle of the Type 65, you've got to shoot nowhere near the driver's hole and nowhere near the machine gun ports. You may look at that machine gun port and think it's very enticing because there's no machine gun there, and maybe it's a dead hole with 0mm of armor. Well, you would be wrong. For some reason it's 65mm of armor with an effective thickness of 70mm. It's basically exactly the same as just shooting the upper glacis, so why not just go for that? The driver's hatch itself actually has more armor on it than the T-34-85D5T at 139mm effective thickness with 75mm overall. So that is going to be a tough cookie to crack. Now this is obviously if you're shooting at the hull. Generally, it's a bad idea to shoot at the hull. It's much better against this vehicle to shoot at the turret. We're talking about 15mm all the way around. This is very much similar to a different vehicle which was added to the game, the FV4005. Basically the one with the massive gun. It also has 14mm all around its turret. So if you treat it like that, and basically just shoot it anywhere in the turret, it's going to do quite a lot. The issue with having such a low thickness is that you may overpen, or because of the way that the crew is, you know, set out, you will only kill 2 crew members, leaving up either a gunner and a loader, or a commander and a loader. So whatever happens, if you decide to shoot on one of the sides of the turret, you're not going to knock out the whole thing. I haven't been hull broken in it, but it seems like it would be a vehicle which, if you did shoot it in the turret with enough clout, it should hull break it. But generally, because it doesn't have that extra machine gunner in the hull of it, if you take out the turret, there is only one guy left who's the driver, so therefore, if you're playing in realistic, you should actually just knock out the vehicle in its entirety. So you should focus on the turret. You've got to make sure to not shoot it in the center though, even though it may seem enticing to try and get that nice spread on the turret. In my experience, because of the fact that it's only 15mm thick, it overpens, so you don't get as much splash damage as you would on a regular tank. And also, the gun breech itself is 60mm. It is the most armor in the turret by far, and you also have this mechanism below it, which is 50mm, which seems to be there to hold the gun, basically some kind of form of vertical aiming drive. So the way the crew works out in the Type 65 is if you are looking straight ahead in the Type 65, you have on the right side one loader, and then below him sat down is the commander who controls the horizontal turning drive, and then you have the gunner on the left and the loader above him. So you have two loaders, which means that it has, at least with my crew, a 1.2 second reload time, which is crazy. I'll just check my statistics. When it comes to my tank loader, my weapon reloading for this crew is only at 2 out of 5. This thing can actually have a maximum reload speed of 1 second. So yeah, it's going to be continually firing at you with only 1 second break every 10 shells. So what you want to aim at, if you're looking at it straight on and its turret is facing you, you want to aim at the right side of the turret. This takes out the gunner and a loader. This will give you enough time to polish off the left side of the turret, where a commander and a loader will sit. But once the gunner is out of action, generally if you hit that area, you will either hit the vertical aiming drive or you'll hit something like the horizontal at the same time. What you shouldn't do is aim from the cannon breech, just because the Type 65, because it's on a T-34 chassis, it also has the ability of the T-34 chassis. It has the exact same engine as the T-34-85D5T, so if you hit it in something like its cannon breech, what will happen is that it will just run away. We all know the quickness or the acceleration of the T-34-85s. Well, this has exactly the same speed. It has the exact same max speed, and it is also 5 tons lighter than the T-34-85D5T, so therefore, in that sense, it should have better acceleration. This is also a good hill climber and all of this stuff, so if you do shoot it and you only take out a cannon breech, make sure to finish the damn thing off, because it will scuttle away incredibly quickly. And it is kind of terrifying when you see one of these things charging about at 40 to 50 kilometers an hour, being able to turn their turrets, at 50 degrees per second, and also, be able to change the vertical very quickly as well, going after tanks, because it means that it can flank you very easily if you don't get a decent first shot off. You've got to make that first shot count, otherwise it's just going to get round you and just going to, well, destroy you. I have also penetrated jumbos through the turret with this gun. I'm not exactly sure how I did it, but it is something I have done. I've also penetrated HVSS Sherman 76s through the turret, killing the loader and the gunner, and then focusing on the turret ring. So just understand that you are not invulnerable to this because of that HVAP belt, because it has over 100 millimeters of penetration. It should be... the hull break should work on it though. I just haven't seen a scenario where I've shot one and the hull break has gone off, or a scenario where I have been hull broken in it. So, but my guess would be it would be hull broken. Something that is slightly different to the T-34 chassis, it has these little boxes on the side of it, which are only 4 millimeters thick. So shooting through it shouldn't be that much of an issue. If you do have a side shot on the Type 65, just hit it slap bang in the middle. All of the ammo, or the majority of the ammo of this machine, is stored at the bottom, right under where you would find the turret. There is also some ammo stored in the back, behind the two loaders, which I'm guessing is the ammo that they would use to fire the gun and then move some of the ammo up. But if you can, and you do have a side shot, just shoot it slap bang in the middle of the hull, which is, if we negate the 4 millimeters, it's only 45 millimeters, 54 millimeters effective thickness, so you're looking at about 60 overall if you include the two things. It may bounce every once in a while, but still, that's the shot to take. The arse of the thing is once again 45 millimeters. Remember, this is a T-34 chassis. And then 10 millimeters and the lower glacis of the arse, which, you should be able to penetrate. But if you have the shot at the back of the Type 65, once again, just shoot it in the turret, try and kill as many people as you can before it goes crazy. the two guys, the two loaders, are actually above the turret for some reason, and therefore, because of that, you can machine gun them in the face and they will die, very similar to a lot of AA we see in the game, such as something like a Flak Panzer. So, if you focus on the gunner, kill the gunner with your shell, you'll probably kill a loader. If you don't, you can just machine gun the two loaders, and then you're just left with two crew in the form of a commander and a driver. At the same time, which is kind of interesting if you're piloting the Type 65, if you go into binoculars view, it seems like they've placed the binoculars view between the two heads of the loaders, and therefore if you turn at a certain angle, you will just see a bunch of head from either side. So, in my opinion, I'm not sure if it's a bug. They put the camera there, so I'm guessing that's where they want the camera to be. But the thing is, what I would recommend them doing is actually elevating the binocular view by maybe half a meter, so when you turn you don't just stare at people's heads, because obviously that's not very useful. Something that is interesting to talk about with the Type 65, which I was going to leave for a video that I'm eventually going to do on the T-34, which is the American T-34, is the fact that it's quite tall. It is an impressively tall vehicle, and something that has been discussed quite heavily in games like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is the advantage of a third-person view over a first-person, and this is amplified if you are taller. Basically, your camera is in a position where it's higher than the majority of other vehicles, so therefore you're able to see over sand dunes, you're able to see over hills, and you're able to see the enemy before they see you, and that is exactly the same as the Type 65. Because of where the camera is situated in the third-person position, you should actually have more coverage than the majority of vehicles that you are fighting. So that is just something to take into account when you are using or fighting this vehicle. It has probably seen you before you have seen it, just because it has that wonderful camera position that it can use. And in my opinion, I would actually favor using the third-person view over the binocular view at this moment in time, because, well, you don't want to stare at the loader's face all day. The Type 65, when we look at it as just a normal AA vehicle, it is a fun AA vehicle to use. It has speed, it has rotation, it has basically everything you would want. The only thing that is lacking is the fire rate, and the fact that the two guns fire at the same time instead of alternatively. That means that you can't cover the sky as much as you may want. You basically have 5 rounds. The clip that you have for the Type 65 is 10. But that is significantly weakened by the fact that both guns fire at the same time, so you effectively only have about 5 rounds when you're shooting aircraft. Obviously, when you're shooting tanks, it's still 2 shells which are going after the tank. But with the aircraft, you want a bit more of a spread. That's what makes stuff like the Ostwind and the Whirlwind so good, because they can create a layer of fire which you have to run into. The Type 65 can't, because it only has 5 shells per clip. And something interesting that I found is when you sit on a zone and you have it captured and you reload your, your ammunition, what it will actually do is the ammunition reloading seems to be half as fast as it generally would for a tank, because it's loading both belts at the same time, or both clips at the same time. So instead of just loading one clip for one of the guns and then loading the other, it does it at the same time, making the procedure twice as long as it normally would be. So that is something to watch out for. Even though this thing does have a lot of ammunition on board at 390, you've just got to understand that you're still going to run out of that. It's going to be a possibility, especially if you're going around gun-ho trying to kill Hellcats. So yeah, just take that into account if you're flying this thing about on the battlefield. One of the interesting things that is brought up quite a lot is the weakness of Russian AA, and it is incredibly weak. We have had some interesting vehicles put in the lower tiers which have made it stronger. The 94 km ZIS-12, the D-Shack Gaz AA, and the 4M Gaz AA are 3 wonderful AA pieces. The 29K is a tank destroyer. The ZIS-43 is not very good because it has the same issue as the ZSU-37, and the ZSU-37 has the same issue of the Type 65. The Type 65, even though it improves a lot on the ZSU-37, what it doesn't improve on is its AA capabilities when it comes to how many shots you can fire in the air to create that cloud that people have to run into. It's all well and good if an aircraft is barreling down on you and coming after you, and therefore you can just shoot in a straight line, but if an aircraft is moving in, you know, it's either diving or it's curving away from you, it's much harder to get a deflection shot in something like this than compared to a Whirlwind or a Crusader AA. What I would compare it to in that regard is something like the M19, but even the M19 has a bit of an advantage over this thing, because if you fire those 40mm Bofors for a while, what will happen is that they will start alternating after firing for a while, so you can cover more of the sky than you can in the Type 65. What it also doesn't help is if people didn't have an opportunity to get the Type 65 in this event, and it seems like a lot of people did, but just imagine if you're a person who is working or does not have the time for the game but just casually likes to play it, you don't get this. And there is still no normal tree equivalent for any AA for Russia between 4.7 and 7.7. It's an issue I brought up before, and it has to be fixed. You shouldn't be going into a 6.7 battle with something like the types, well, let's say 7.3, right? 7.3, so T-54-47, IS-3, right? You can't be bringing in a ZSU-37 if you want to have a lineup which isn't 7.7 with the ZSU-57-2. Let's go 7.0, so Type 62, 6.7, T-44-100, 7.0, even the Object 906 if you want to throw that in, IS-6, which everybody seems to like. Then you throw in the ZSU-37, because you don't have anything in that bracket. We need some kind of normal tree vehicle which is Tier 4 and AA focused for Russia. Even though it's nice to get a gift vehicle which kind of fits that pack, and if I'm bringing vehicles in around 6.7 or 7.0, I feel a lot more comfortable in something like a Type 65 than a ZSU-37, it's still not comparable to what we should have in the tree, and it also means that it's only open for a selective number of players. Is it a good vehicle in the sense that it is a rare vehicle and therefore it's a kind of interesting vehicle? Is it a good gift vehicle, basically, is what I'm saying. And I think it is. It's something that is based on a T-34, but has a completely different turret. It is completely different to other stuff that we have in the game. It's a new model, which is nice. But does that solve the problem that we need solving, which is the 3.0 gap of AA that Russia has? No, it doesn't. So it would be nice to see in the next updates if we get some kind of vehicles which fill that gap. I mean, they've slowly been working their way up the tree with the Russian AA, so hopefully we'll see it fixed. And also, to all you Hellcat drivers out there, run. Run fast.